6 hours. That's how long the commission debated whether Dutch Schultz should live or die. 6 hours of arguing, negotiating, weighing the consequences. And when those 6 hours were over, the verdict was unanimous. Dutch Schultz, the beer baron of the Bronx, the man who'd survived gang wars, federal trials, and assassination attempts, was sentenced to death, not by a judge, not by a jury, but by his own people, by Lucky Luciano, by Meyer Lansky, by the very men who'd once called him an ally. His crime? Threatening to assassinate Thomas Dewey, the federal prosecutor who'd made it his life's mission to destroy organized crime in New York. Dutch had walked into a commission meeting and asked for permission to kill Dewey. They said no. Dutch said he'd do it anyway. He walked out of that meeting alive. But 8 days later, on October 23, 1935, Dutch Schultz walked into a bathroom at the Palace Chop House in Newark, New Jersey. And he never walked out. This is a story of how one man's ego destroyed him, how desperation turned into defiance, and how the most powerful gangster in the Bronx became a liability that even Lucky Luciano couldn't tolerate. Summer of 1935. Dutch Schultz was drowning, not literally, but financially, legally, and mentally. The man who'd once made $20 million a year from bootlegging and the numbers racket was watching his empire crumble. And it was all because of one man, Thomas Edmund Dewey, Special Prosecutor, future governor of New York, future presidential candidate, and in 1935, Dutch Schultz's worst nightmare. Thomas Dewey was 33 years old, young, ambitious, and absolutely relentless. He'd been appointed special prosecutor by Governor Herbert Lehman with one mission: clean up organized crime in New York City. And Dewey had chosen his first target carefully. Not Lucky Luciano, not Meyer Lansky, not the Italian mafia bosses who controlled the docks and the unions. No, Dewey went after Dutch Schultz. Why? Because Dutch was vulnerable. Because Dutch had made mistakes. Because Dutch had gotten sloppy. Let's go back to 1933. Dutch Schultz was on top of the world. His bootlegging operation generated millions. His control of the Harlem numbers racket brought in thousands more every day. He had politicians in his pocket, cops on his payroll. He owned entire neighborhoods. But Dutch had a problem. He didn't pay taxes. From 1929 to 1931, Dutch Schultz earned millions of dollars and paid exactly $0 in federal income tax. And in 1933, the federal government noticed. The IRS had just successfully prosecuted Al Capone for tax evasion. Capone, the most famous gangster in America, was now rotting in Alcatraz, and the feds wanted another big fish. They chose Dutch Schultz. In January 1933, Dutch was indicted for tax evasion. The government claimed he owed over $90,000 in back taxes. That doesn't sound like much today. But in 1933, $90,000 was a fortune. More importantly, the charge carried serious prison time. Dutch knew he was in trouble. He did what any smart criminal does when indicted. He disappeared. Dutch went into hiding for almost 2 years. He moved from hideout to hideout. New Jersey, Connecticut, upstate New York. Always moving. Always one step ahead of the feds. But hiding meant he couldn't run his operations. His lieutenants managed things, but they weren't Dutch. Money started disappearing. Shipments got hijacked. Competitors moved into his territory. Dutch's empire was bleeding. By November 1934, Dutch made a decision. He couldn't hide forever. So he did something surprising. He surrendered. He walked into the federal courthouse in Albany, posted bail, and demanded a trial. But Dutch had a strategy. He convinced his lawyers to move the trial out of New York City. He argued that he couldn't get a fair trial there. The newspapers had painted him as a monster. The jury pool was poisoned. The judge agreed. The first trial was moved to Syracuse. Small city, upstate New York, far from the media circus of New York City. And Dutch Schultz prepared to put on the performance of his life. He stopped dressing like a gangster. No more flashy suits. No more silk ties. Dutch started wearing cheap, rumpled clothes. He wanted to look like an average guy, a working man, not a millionaire mobster. He hired the best lawyers money could buy, and they poked holes in the government's case. The prosecution struggled to prove exactly how much money Dutch had made. The financial records were incomplete. Witnesses were unreliable. After weeks of testimony, the jury couldn't reach a verdict. Hung jury. Dutch walked free. The government wasn't done. They scheduled a second trial, this time in Malone, New York. Even smaller, even more remote, population 5,000. And Dutch Schultz turned himself into a local hero. He moved to Malone weeks before the trial. He rented a house. He walked around town. He talked to people. He donated money to local businesses. He bought toys for sick children. He attended church. He became friends with farmers. He acted like a generous country gentleman who'd been falsely accused by an overreaching government. It worked. In late summer 1935, the jury acquitted Dutch Schultz. Not guilty. Dutch was free. He'd beaten the federal government twice. He'd beaten Thomas Dewey, or so he thought. New York's mayor, Fiorello LaGuardia, was furious. He held a press conference and announced that Dutch Schultz was banned from New York City. If Dutch returned, he'd be arrested on sight. It was an unprecedented move, but LaGuardia didn't care. He wanted Dutch gone. So Dutch moved his headquarters to Newark, New Jersey, just across the river from New York. He could still run his operations, but it wasn't the same. Dutch was isolated, paranoid, and Thomas Dewey wasn't finished. Dewey announced he was investigating Dutch for restaurant racketeering, for extortion, for murder. Dewey was going to prosecute Dutch again. And this time, Dewey promised Dutch would go to prison. Dutch Schultz snapped. By October 1935, Dutch was convinced that Thomas Dewey was the source of all his problems. If Dewey was gone, Dutch could rebuild his empire. If Dewey was dead, the investigations would stop. The pressure would ease. Dutch would be free. So Dutch made a decision that would cost him everything. He decided to kill Thomas Dewey. But Dutch wasn't stupid. He knew that killing a federal prosecutor would bring massive heat. So he did what mob protocol required. He asked for permission from the Commission. The Commission was the governing body of organized crime in America, created by Lucky Luciano in 1931. The Commission was made up of the most powerful mob bosses in New York. Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello, Joe Bonanno. These men controlled everything. Docks, unions, gambling, prostitution, bootlegging. The Commission made decisions about territory, about conflicts, about major moves that could affect everyone. And killing a federal prosecutor definitely qualified. In early October 1935, Dutch Schultz called for an emergency commission meeting. He wanted to present his proposal formally, to explain why Thomas Dewey had to die. The meeting was held in a Manhattan hotel room. Every major boss was there. Dutch walked in confident. He believed they'd agree with him. He was wrong. Dutch laid out his case. Thomas Dewey is trying to destroy us. He's not just coming after me. He's coming after all of you. If we let him take me down, you're next. He'll prosecute Luciano. He'll go after Lansky. He'll dismantle everything we've built. The only solution is to eliminate him. One bullet, one prosecutor, and all our problems disappear. Lucky Luciano responded immediately. He said no. Not just no, but absolutely not. We don't kill prosecutors. We don't kill politicians. We don't kill federal officials. You know why? Because if we do, every cop in America will come after us. The feds will declare war. They'll bring in the army if they have to. Killing Thomas Dewey isn't a solution. It's suicide. Meyer Lansky agreed. This is insane. Dewey is a public figure, a hero. The newspapers love him. If he dies, especially if he's assassinated by the mob, we'll never recover. They'll shut down every operation from here to Chicago. Frank Costello added his voice. We've survived prosecutors before. We'll survive Dewey. You beat him twice in court. You can beat him again. But if we kill him, we can't beat the response. Joe Bonanno called the idea crazy. He told Dutch that killing Dewey would bring heat that nobody could survive. Not Dutch. Not the Commission. Not organized crime as a whole. The Commission voted. It was unanimous. 5-0. No, Dutch Schultz was forbidden from killing Thomas Dewey. Dutch's face turned red. He stood up. He started yelling. You're all cowards. You're going to let one prosecutor destroy everything we've built? You're going to sit here and do nothing while Dewey picks us off one by one? Fine. I don't need your permission. I'll do it myself. And when Dewey is dead, you'll thank me. Dutch stormed out of the meeting. He didn't wait for a response. He didn't listen to warnings. He just left. The room went silent. Lucky Luciano looked around at the other bosses. We have a problem. Meyer Lansky nodded. If Dutch kills Dewey, we're all dead. Frank Costello asked the obvious question. What do we do? Lucky Luciano's answer was simple. We kill Dutch first. Another vote. Another unanimous decision. Dutch Schultz was now a dead man walking. But the commission had to be careful. They couldn't just send hitmen after Dutch immediately. They needed to know for sure that Dutch was actually going to move forward with the Dewey assassination. So Lucky Luciano reached out to Albert Anastasia. Anastasia was the head of Murder Incorporated, a group of professional killers who handled contracts for the commission. Anastasia was brutal, efficient, loyal, and he reported directly to Luciano. Have your men follow Dutch. Watch what he's doing. If he's planning the Dewey hit, let me know immediately. Within days, Anastasia came back with disturbing news. Dutch Schultz had already begun planning the assassination. He'd assigned men to stake out Thomas Dewey's apartment building on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. They were watching Dewey's schedule, learning his routines, figuring out the best time and place to kill him. Dutch wasn't bluffing. He was actually going to do it. Lucky Luciano called another commission meeting. This one was secret. No Dutch. No warning. The bosses gathered and discussed the situation for 6 hours. They argued. They debated. Some thought maybe they should give Dutch one more chance. Maybe they should warn him again. Maybe they should try to talk him down. But Lucky Luciano shut that down. Dutch has made his decision. He's going to kill Dewey. And when he does, the feds will come after all of us. Dutch is a liability. He's unstable. He's desperate. And he's going to get us all killed. We have one option. We eliminate him before he eliminates Dewey. The vote was taken again, this time with finality. Louis Buckleter, known as Lepka, was ordered to arrange Dutch Schultz's assassination. Buckleter ran Murder Incorporated alongside Albert Anastasia. He would coordinate the hit. The target was Dutch Schultz. The timeline was immediate. No delays. No second chances. Dutch Schultz had to die. October 23rd, 1935. Dutch Schultz was having dinner at the Palace Chop House in Newark, New Jersey. The Palace Chop House was Dutch's new headquarters, a restaurant on East Park Street. Nothing fancy, just a place where Dutch could meet with his men, conduct business, and eat a decent steak. Dutch was there with 3 associates. Otto Abadaba Berman, his accountant, a mathematical genius who ran Dutch's numbers racket. Abe Landau, Dutch's new chief lieutenant, a tough enforcer who'd been with Dutch for years, and Bernard Lulu Rosenkrantz, Dutch's personal bodyguard, the man who never left Dutch's side. The 4 men sat at a back table. Ledgers were spread out. They were going over the books, discussing money, planning operations. It was just another night. Routine business. At 10:15 in the evening, 2 men walked into the Palace Chop House. Charles the Bug Workman and Emmanuel Mendy Weiss. Both were Murder Incorporated hitmen. Both had killed dozens of men. Both were there on orders from Louis Buckleter and Lucky Luciano. They walked past the front tables, past the bar, past the waiters. Nobody stopped them. Nobody questioned them. They looked like regular customers. When they reached the back room, they saw Dutch's men hunched over the ledgers. Workmen and Weiss drew their weapons, pistols, and they opened fire. The first shots killed Otto Berman instantly. He collapsed over the ledger sheets. Blood sprayed across the numbers he'd been calculating. Abe Landau tried to draw his gun. He was hit 3 times. Chest, shoulder, stomach. He fell. Lulu Rosenkrantz pulled his weapon and fired back. He hit Mendy Weiss in the arm. But Workman shot Rosenkrantz 4 times. Rosenkrantz went down. 3 men shot, all dying. But where was Dutch? Dutch Schultz had been in the bathroom when the shooting started. He heard the gunfire. He tried to come out, but Charles Workman was already moving. Workman kicked open the bathroom door. Dutch was standing there, unarmed, exposed. Workman raised his .45 caliber pistol and fired one shot. The bullet hit Dutch Schultz in the side. It entered below his ribs, tore through his stomach, nicked his large intestine, and lodged near his spine. Dutch collapsed. Workman didn't fire again. One shot was enough. He turned and ran. Mendy Weiss was already heading for the door. The hit had taken less than 90 seconds. 4 men shot, 3 dead or dying. 1, Dutch Schultz, mortally wounded. The hit men disappeared into the night. And Dutch Schultz, the beer baron of the Bronx, lay bleeding on a bathroom floor. The police and ambulance arrived within minutes. Dutch was still alive. Barely. He was conscious but in shock. The medics loaded him onto a stretcher and rushed him to Newark City Hospital. Surgeons worked on him immediately, but the damage was catastrophic. The bullet had torn through multiple organs. Internal bleeding was massive. Infection was setting in. The doctors knew Dutch wouldn't survive, but Dutch Schultz refused to die quickly. He lingered for 22 hours, in and out of consciousness, delirious from blood loss and infection. During those 22 hours, Dutch said some of the strangest last words in criminal history. Police stenographers recorded everything. Dutch rambled about his childhood, about his mother, about buried treasure. He mumbled about a boy who could sing and a dog biscuit. He mentioned Phoenicia, a town in upstate New York, where many believed Dutch had buried $7 million in cash and bonds before his death. His exact words were, "French-Canadian bean soup. I want to pay. Let them leave me alone. Oh, dog biscuit. And when he is happy, he doesn't get snappy." The police tried to get useful information. They asked who shot him. Dutch refused to answer. Even dying, he followed the code. No snitching. No cooperation with cops. At one point, Dutch's wife arrived. She held his hand. Dutch looked at her and whispered something nobody else could hear. Then he closed his eyes. At 6:54 in the evening on October 24th, 1935, Dutch Schultz died. He was 33 years old. The newspapers ran huge headlines. Dutch Schultz killed. The most famous gangster in New York, dead in a bathroom, murdered by his own people. The funeral was small. Dutch's family was there. A few loyal associates. No mob bosses. Nobody from the commission. Lucky Luciano didn't attend. Meyer Lansky didn't send flowers. Dutch Schultz was buried alone. Meanwhile, Thomas Dewey was alive and well. He didn't know how close he'd come to being assassinated. He wouldn't learn the full story until years later. But Dewey understood what Dutch's death meant. The mob had limits. They wouldn't tolerate a member who threatened the entire organization. Thomas Dewey would go on to become governor of New York. He'd run for president twice. He'd become one of the most powerful politicians in America. And it all started because Lucky Luciano chose to kill Dutch Schultz rather than risk Dewey's assassination. Lucky Luciano and the commission had made the right call. If Dutch had killed Dewey, the federal response would have been devastating. Every mob operation in America would have been shut down. Every boss would have been arrested. The entire structure of organized crime would have collapsed. By killing Dutch, the commission saved themselves. But let's talk about what really happened in that 6-hour commission meeting. Because history books give us the facts, but they don't always capture the emotion, the desperation, the fear. When Dutch Schultz walked out of that meeting after threatening to kill Dewey anyway, Lucky Luciano knew he had to act fast. But it wasn't an easy decision. Dutch had been part of the New York Underworld for over a decade. He'd fought alongside these men. He'd made the money. He'd survived gang wars, federal prosecutions, and assassination attempts. In another era, Dutch would have been celebrated. But times had changed. The commission had created rules, structure, order, and Dutch Schultz was chaos. He was emotional, impulsive, violent. He'd beaten 2 federal tax trials by charming small-town juries. But he couldn't charm his way out of a murder charge. And when Thomas Dewey brought that charge, Dutch would go to prison. Dutch knew it. The commission knew it, and Dutch's solution, killing the prosecutor, was a solution of a desperate man. Meyer Lansky said it best after Dutch's death. Dutch was a good earner, but he lost his mind. He thought he could fight the government by killing one man. He thought he was bigger than the system. And that's what killed him. Not us. Not Lucky. Dutch killed himself the moment he said he'd kill Dewey. Here's the part that most people don't know. After Dutch died, his empire didn't disappear. It was absorbed. Lucky Luciano took over Dutch's numbers racket in Harlem. Meyer Lansky took control of the restaurant extortion schemes. Frank Costello moved into Dutch's territories. The commission divided up Dutch's operations like vultures picking at a corpse. Thomas Dewey estimated that Dutch Schultz's gang had made $20 million a year at its peak. All of that money now flowed to the commission. Dutch's death made Lucky Luciano even richer, even more powerful. And that was part of the calculation. Killing Dutch wasn't just about stopping the Dewey assassination. It was also about opportunity. Dutch was isolated, paranoid, weakened by legal troubles. He was vulnerable. And in the mob, vulnerability is an invitation. The commission killed Dutch to protect themselves. But they also killed him to take what was his. Charles Workman, the hitman who pulled the trigger, was arrested in 1941. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. He served 23 years before being paroled. When reporters asked him about killing Dutch Schultz, Workman shrugged. It was just a job. Nothing personal. That's how the mob worked. Nothing personal. Just business. Just survival. Dutch Schultz's buried treasure became legend. He'd reportedly hidden $7 million somewhere in upstate New York, near Phoenicia in the Catskill Mountains. He'd commissioned a special airtight, waterproof safe, put the money inside, and buried it with his bodyguard, Lulu Rosencrantz. When both men died at the Palace Chop House, the location of the treasure died with them. For decades, treasure hunters searched the Catskills. They dug up hillsides. They followed clues from Dutch's deathbed ramblings. Nobody ever found it. To this day, $7 million, worth over $100 million in today's money, is supposedly buried somewhere in the mountains, waiting, undiscovered. But here's the irony. Dutch buried that money because he was afraid he'd go to prison. He wanted a nest egg for when he got out. But Dutch never went to prison. He went to a grave. And his treasure, his backup plan, became his legend. People remember Dutch Schultz not for his bootlegging empire, not for his numbers racket, not for surviving 2 federal trials. They remember him for the treasure he buried and the mob that killed him when he threatened to cross a line even gangsters wouldn't cross. Look, the story of Dutch Schultz asking to kill Thomas Dewey is more than just mob history. It's a story about limits, about rules, about what happens when one man's desperation threatens everyone else's survival. Dutch Schultz walked into that commission meeting thinking he'd get approval. He believed that killing one prosecutor was a reasonable solution to his problems. He was wrong. The commission understood something Dutch didn't. In the criminal underworld, you can kill rivals. You can kill traitors. You can kill witnesses. But you don't kill federal prosecutors. You don't kill politicians. You don't kill people whose deaths will bring the full weight of the government down on everyone. Dutch couldn't accept that. His ego wouldn't let him. He'd beaten Thomas Dewey twice in court. He thought he was untouchable. He thought he was smarter than everyone else. And when the commission said no, Dutch's response was to do it anyway. That defiance signed his death warrant. Lucky Luciano didn't want to kill Dutch, but he had no choice. Dutch was going to get them all killed. So Luciano made the hard decision. He ordered the hit. He sent Murder Incorporated. And on October 23, 1935, Dutch Schultz died in a bathroom, killed by the same organization he'd helped build. If this story about Dutch Schultz's fatal mistake got your attention, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel because we're dropping true crime history stories every single week. Drop a comment and tell me, do you think the commission made the right call? Should they have let Dutch try to kill Dewey? Or was killing Dutch the only option? And turn on notifications because next week we're telling the story of Lucky Luciano's rise to power and how he became the most powerful mobster in America by doing something nobody expected. betraying his own boss. Remember, in the world of organized crime, there are rules, and breaking those rules has consequences. Dutch Schultz broke the ultimate rule. He threatened everyone's survival, and he paid for it with his life. One commission meeting, one refusal, one defiant walk out the door. 8 days later, one bullet in a bathroom. Dutch Schultz was 33 years old when he died, the same age as Thomas Dewey. One man lived to become governor. The other died on a bathroom floor, all because Dutch couldn't accept the word no.